Hi guys, welcome to Mentorship Monday. All right, I know that a lot of you guys have taken the long weekend or taken a long weekend off and all these things, so I'm not expecting lots of us, but as always, we always watch these Mentorship Mondays afterwards. But hey, look, it's Temelo, you, magnificence. Hello to you, Ritabile, Gugumiso. Hello, Kay. Hello, nice to see you, Tiamo and Chulile Karabo, Mulanga, Tejo. Hi, Basket Buddies founder. All right, I'd love to know what that's all about. Khanya, hello to you, Pelo. Hello to you guys. I'm just gonna say hello just to give it a couple of seconds. Opa Teleki, hello to you, Marvin. Nice to see the guys joining us as well. Zim, hello, Zim Klati, Oli, nice to see you. Shaka, nice to see you. Noxy, Opulent and Bongani, Boy Pilo, Hlelo. Hello guys. Hi Benny. Okay, so yeah guys, sorry, my eyes are a bit red. So whenever I'm feeling like a little bit fluey, the first thing that happens is that my eyes go a bit red. So I'm not crying, I'm good. I'm just dealing with massive allergies with my eyes. Even my glasses are a little bit uncomfortable today, so just bear with me. But God is good, God is great all the time. The eyes might not be working, but this guy, this mouth here is working. Slindo Gutle, my person, hello to you too. Guys, I know that it's 5-2 a holiday. A lot of people took a long weekend off, so I'm not really I wasn't expecting a lot of us on, but it's so amazing to see the Mentorship Monday community on. So we're gonna do it as usual, right? I've got some great questions that have come from you guys, so I want to spend a little bit of time on those questions. But I do also want to just say, guys, thank you so much for such an amazing session with Dr. Lulu Gwagwa. I see that you guys have really enjoyed some of the sound bites that we were able to lift from the chat with her. So more of those are to come. And yes, Kens, thank you so much. Happy Women's Day for tomorrow. Happy Women's Day. Happy Women's Week. Happy Women's Month. What an amazing time it is for all of us to do two things. For me, Women's Month is about doing two things. One, it's about celebrating where there has been progress, right? And saying, okay, we're making progress here. Mulanga saying it's not a holiday for me here in the UK. So hello, Mulanga. But the other thing is also about shining a spotlight, right? It's also about shining a spotlight on the stubborn issues, the things that are not changing fast enough. So it's really, really important that it is an important month. It's not just celebration for celebration's sake. And so maybe we'll talk a little bit about some of those things. So Sinamile, hello, Yoliswa Mapiri, nice to see you as well. Okay, so I want to pick up on a couple of questions. Sure, I'm going to start off with a big one. A big question. It comes from Ndumiso Mahlangu, and the question is, oh, my voice, and I'm alone today, guys, so I don't even have anybody to grab me water. The question is, in a society where being competitive, is viewed as a negative trait, how do you then believe in collaborations? Which I think is an excellent question. So in a society where being competitive is viewed as a negative trait, how do you then believe in collaboration? So I love the question because I think it's hitting on a number of issues. On the one hand, it is about how do you collaborate even while you're trying to be competitive in the market? And also when you are trying to collaborate, how do you keep the spirit of collaboration and not just make it then not just become competitive? So maybe let me think of or share a couple of examples where I have collaborated and how my mindset to collaboration. So last year I hosted a moderator's masterclass, and I invited people who I think are amazing moderators globally. I invited Bronwyn Nielsen, I invited Andile Kumalo, I invited Georgie Ndirangu, who's with the BBC. And a range of, and Bronwyn Nielsen has been with CNBC Africa, is now with the Nielsen Network. Andile Kumalo is probably one of the best MCs that there are, especially in the business and the commerce space. And I reached out to them and I said, hey, let's do something together. Let's all give back as a community of moderators to emerging moderators. And let me tell you what was interesting, although I'm not too surprised because I know all of these guys personally. Each and every one of them said yes. So firstly, no hesitation. I didn't have to beg. I didn't have to do anything. Both, all of them, right from the bat, said, absolutely yes, we're going to do it. What do you need from us? And I remember that was going to be literally a 3-hour session. So really, really a long session. And I had said to them, guys, you can come in. You can come this hour, and this hour. And the funny thing is they all stayed for the 3 hours. What do I take away from that? I think that when you are trying to collaborate with others, what is your intention around that collaboration? I have oftentimes been approached by people who want to collaborate, not because they want to give as well as receive in the relationship, but it's a collaboration where there's only one-sided benefit. And I think that's the first thing. Like, what's your posture of collaboration? Are you really collaborating because you have considered how you're adding value to that collaborative effort? Or are you collaborating only because you're looking to gain from that particular relationship? I'll give you another really simple example. I'll oftentimes get invitations from people who say, Nozi, I'd like to host you on an Instagram live. Or Nozi, can you host me on an Instagram live or Mentorship Mondays? And oftentimes I look at this person, I go to myself, do we have a relationship? Have you ever given anything into me? Have you ever made an attempt just to connect with me, to know me? Have you supported anything that I've done? Have you ever followed me? Have you actually engaged with any of my content? Or are you looking at my 5 followers and thinking, okay, cool, if I do a collaboration with Nozi, I get those 5 followers and that visibility? Unfortunately, the intent behind a collaboration is always going to come through. If your intent is poor, the person that you are pursuing is going to feel it. And so I always say, before you approach someone for a collaboration, think deeply about, what am I bringing into this collaborative space? What value am I adding? What is this person going to get out of me collaborating with them? And in the same way, be honest about what it is that you're seeking to get out of that collaboration, right? Because we only collaborate because the sum of the 2 parts make a bigger whole. Otherwise, you just do your thing and I just do my thing. But if we think that by coming together, we create something even bigger, where 1 + 1 = 3, that's why we collaborate. So I think it starts with a very important conversation with self about intent. What are my intentions? What is the value that I think I'm going to be delivering and giving into the space? And what is the value I'm hoping to realize? And be okay with the fact that you also want to get something out of that relationship. I think then once the collaboration starts, I think it's important to be true to the posture that you carry throughout the collaboration. What I mean by that is that I think sometimes we start with the intent to collaborate and then the competitive spirit gets ahead of us, and suddenly you're suddenly getting or letting your competitive bias take over. I'll give you an example. I've been invited to a number of lives, or somebody invites me on a live and they're asking me to join because they really believe, for example, that their audience is keen and to hear what I have to say on a particular subject. And then you find the person who's interviewing you, speaking over you, dominating the conversation, not letting you get a word in. And you realize very quickly that this has stopped being a collaborative conversation where there's give and take, where we both have voice, where we both take on the posture of listening from time to time. And what's actually happened now is that we're having a competitive conversation, each person trying to compete for their share of voice in the conversation. And in the process of that, nobody is listening. Right? Because we're all trying to outshine and outshow each other in that space. And so you need to be, you got to be clear about your posture during collaboration. Are you staying true? Peter, I just want to pin your comment. I'll come back to it now. Are you staying true to the intent? What do you set out to do? And how do you then make sure that as you stay true to that intent, that your behavior and the way you show up in that space is consistent with what you set out to do? Maybe the last thing that I'd always say is close off that collaboration, right? And the way you close it off is you go back to the intent and say, did I realize the value? that I set out to realize? And did the other person in the collaborative effort realize the value that they were seeking from me? And if I'm the one who didn't deliver on the value, what can I do differently going forward? And if they're the one who didn't deliver on the intended value, how do I give them constructive feedback so that they can be a better collaborative partner to me, but to others as well? That is the thing about collaboration. It's about being alive to give and take. It's about being alive to the idea that somebody else is going to benefit from what you have, and be okay with that because you understand that you're going to be benefiting from what they have as well. It takes a great deal of humility to collaborate effectively, because true collaborators start off with being humble about that which they don't have. They are humble about the gaps that they have in their craft, in the way they see the world, and they are open to the idea of saying, who has this that I don't have? Last comment on this. One of the collaborative efforts that I think, one of the signs of a collaborative effort that doesn't work, is when two people who are doing exactly the same thing are trying to collaborate. And so there isn't a gap that is a unique contribution from one or the other. They're both vying for the same space. And I think that becomes really difficult to collaborate then. Let me look at the comments. Peter is saying, let me see, Peter, where are you now? If I can find you. There. Can't you give without expecting something from the other person? Sometimes it's about pouring into other people's lives without expecting anything from them. So Peter, in that instance, it's not a collaborative effort. You're giving. It's philanthropy, it's giving in kind, it's volunteering. But the minute we say collaboration, I almost want to look at, I'm on my phone. I almost want to look at the root word. Where does the word collaboration come from? Because I always find that, one of the things, so I'm looking at my computer here. One of the things that always helps us to make sure that we don't conflate issues and we don't confuse. So here it is. This is the definition of collaboration: the action of working with someone to produce something. So it is this idea that you are giving and that person is also giving. That person is not a passive recipient of your effort, of your time. And in the event that that person is a passive recipient, then it's not a collaboration. You're giving. It's philanthropy, it's volunteering, it's giving of your time, it's paying it forward, whatever language that we're trying to use. But in a collaborative effort, it's working together. And I also like the comment that came from, I think it was Cans. You were commenting on the idea of collaboration in the workplace. Imagine having to collaborate with somebody at work, and then they decide that they're going to be the passive recipient, and you're going to do all the work. That's no longer collaboration. If anything, that's an exploitation. But thank you, Peter, for asking the question, because it allows us to be very clear about what it is we're getting into when we're saying we're collaborating, and what it is that we're not going, what our expectations are of a collaborative effort. I just want to make sure that I'm not missing any. Okay, Basket Buddies founder says, any MOU ideas when collaborating? I think it's a great question. And then Avetando, I'm going to come back to you. Avetando saying, great comment, Peter, on practical sense. Is there a situation where people give without expectation? So Avetando, that's really easy. We just spoke about that. So that's, when you're giving of your time, I do a lot of talks in schools. I'm not collaborating. I'm coming in. I'm giving my IP. I'm giving my time. I'm giving my effort. And, sometimes you think you're not receiving in those situations, but you actually are receiving. You're receiving validation of your work. You're receiving affirmation of your work. But to a large extent, when you look at it from a resources perspective, you're doing the giving, but you also are receiving in other ways as well. I want to go back to the question that from basketball founder who says any MOU ideas. So memorandum of understanding, right? That's an MOU. So how do we think about MOUs if we're going into collaborative efforts? I think it's a fantastic question. So I oftentimes come across a lot of contracts. I have to do a lot of contracts in my work because I work with a range of different clients who have a range of different expectations. I also work with service providers, right, who provide me with services. And a contract and a memorandum of understanding are not too different. An MOU is probably less legally binding than a contract, but I always think that we shouldn't leave any open-ended issues in an MOU just because it's not legally binding. The tips that I would give is to be very clear about role clarity. What are you going to do? What am I going to do? What is the scope of what you're going to do? So when I say what are you going to do, how much of it, how many times, how will we know that you have given that which you had intended to give in that collaborative effort? And so it has to be something that is quantifiable. When we leave things open-ended, because we don't want it to feel too much like a contract, we're actually leaving the door open for lots of misinterpretation and misunderstandings to come through. So one of the lessons that I've been actually trying to teach one of the service providers that I work with in giving them feedback and actually saying I'm going to mentor you guys through this is that even in the drafting of contracts, you can't step into a contractual space only thinking about yourself. It makes the negotiation of finding each other so much harder because it's clear in the way the contract or the MOU is drafted that you're only looking up for number one. That is no longer a collaborative effort. So you've got to think about how does the spirit of collaboration live within even the MOU and live within the contract? What are the things you're willing to give? And what are the things you're not willing to give on? And be able to have a conversation around those things. But I think an MOU, especially when you're going to be partnering with either another entity, rather look at a proper contract and then take that contract as the basis for your MOU. Literally go to a joint service level agreement if you can. That way it's in black and white. Everybody knows what it is that they're supposed to do and what they're not supposed to do. And it's a give and take. The minute it stops being a give and take, then the seesaw is skewed. One person is benefiting at the expense of the other. It's no longer a collaborative effort. By the way, because something is collaborative doesn't mean that you're going to gain the same amount. Right? Because you're gaining different things and probably those things of different value. So you need to be able to then say, these are the different things. How do we then make that fair and just for the both of us? But I love the question, and I think it's making me feel like we should have a session on contracts and the loopholes and the things to look out for in contracts so you don't find yourself in difficult situations. It's a learning curve. I have found that I keep learning because sometimes I come across something in a contract from a client and I'm like, I've never seen that before. Why would you expect me to do that? And I have to go back and go, okay, let me get onto a call, let me understand, or better yet, have it on email so that there's no misunderstanding, so I can really understand what it is that you're trying to get to with that clause in the contract. And legalese is really difficult sometimes, and so you always need sometimes to actually even consult a lawyer if it is a serious contract, so that you're not signing something, signing your life away when you shouldn't be. Okay, right. Ndumi, so your question took us down lots of avenues, but I thought it was a really good question. Okay, so Pamela Pam sent us a question. I think it's Pamela Pam because the surname is P-A-A-M. I'm going to try read this question, and then I'm going to try speak to it. But the question is, what is your advice to young girls who are too afraid to go out and live their lives and look for money from others? I feel like this is a Sis Dolly question, but I'm going to give it a shot. And I want to change the question, Pamela, a little bit, because I don't think I'm speaking to young girls in this Mentorship Monday. I think I'm speaking to grown men and grown women. And so all I'm going to do is share my perspectives, right? My worldview. My worldview is not the truth. It's not a universal truth. It's not the only truth, but I want to share my worldview about financial independence between the genders. and what I think about it. Team Maslo's laughing at me. Yeah, I do feel it's a sis Dolly question, but it's a good question. It's Women's Month. We need to talk about these things. So I shared this a little bit on last week's Mentorship Monday with Dr. Lulu, but it was a small snippet. So I just want to slow it down because I think this is really, really important. So I was doing a conference for Ellen Gray, right? So for those of you who know Ellen Gray, you know that Ellen Gray is a big investment firm. And we were talking about how the gender pay gap at work, so the fact that women get on average paid less for the same jobs that men do, right? And how that gender pay gap in the workplace actually carries itself through to the retirement savings gap. So if you're making less money in the workplace as a woman, the likelihood, is that whatever you're saving for retirement, your pension fund, your retirement annuities, all of these things that you're saving for are going to be relatively smaller because your contribution towards them are smaller because you're making less money than the average man in the workplace to start off with. So that's what we were talking about. But let me tell you what I learned, and it's really, really stuck with me. So firstly, I learned that we all have biases, right? So we all know that we all have biases. We see the world in a certain way and we make certain assumptions about people. And so what tends to happen is that a lot of male financial advisors are giving women financial advice that is biased, that is more risk averse, and has the likelihood of actually translating into fewer returns for them, even when they're investing in the market. So I'm going to say that slowly again. I'm saying that because of the biases that we have as individuals, the research shows that women are getting financial advice that is more risk averse. So they're not taking the high risk, high return product offerings on the main because the financial advisor in front of them is looking at them and thinking, because this one is a woman, this is the kind of financial product or financial instrument she should be getting. Now, that's problematic on a number of levels because it means that unless you are conscious of the fact that your financial advisor is biased, the likelihood is that you're going to follow that advice, and in following that advice, you're making less money than with the guy who is coming to the same financial advisor, taking a higher risk and probably making a higher return. But it gets worse than that. The other thing that I learned is that when we were in our 20s, so if you think about a young man and a young woman, first jobs, they arrive in the workplace. When we're in our 20s, we are fairly equal as guys and girls. We're coming into the workplace with our degrees or our diplomas. We're getting into our entry-level jobs. And in our 20s, we are as equal as we're ever going to be in terms of workplace and earnings. Thereafter, we begin to then see a gap opening up like this, and there are a number of things that create that gap. The first of those gaps is that women in their late 20s, early 30s get married, right? And you're probably thinking, yeah, but a woman getting married, how's that going to have a financial impact on her? It does, because it depends on who she marries and the culture that she marries into and the kind of man that she marries into, the traditions and his beliefs. And so a lot of women are then subjected to what they're calling the family penalty, right? The family penalty means that in the time that you take the time you take out to go have children, as an example, translates into a penalty in your career trajectory. You take time out to go on maternity leave. When you come back out of maternity leave, you're just probably not moving as fast a pace as the men who never had to sit out 9 months or a year or even longer, as some women choose to take even longer in their careers. So you already have this back foot. And if you haven't had your children yet, if you've decided that you're going to delay having children and you're going to have children a little bit later on, what tends to happen is that you get fewer and fewer opportunities your way, because those who are hiring you are looking at you and saying, but this one, she's still going to take maternity leave. We can't give her this leadership position. She hasn't had her children yet. And if she now decides that she's going to have her children one of the other, this firm, this company, this organization is going to take a hit because we're going to have to be paying this person maternity leave and she's not here, and probably hiring somebody else in the meantime to do her job. So whether you have your children early in your 20s or whether you have your children later in your mid-30s or later, if you're in your 20s, you're going to get that family penalty right up front. If you're taking if you're having your children a little bit later, you're probably going to have to face that penalty all the way leading up to those mid to late 30s because of all the opportunities you're going to be passed up on because of the fear that you're still going to go into a period of having children, right? And Tabeleng, I'm going to pin your comment and I'll come back to that. And then one last thing that I learned in that conversation is that it all goes back to socialization. And when I mean socialization, I'm talking about what are the things that shape the kind of habits and attitudes that women and that girls at young ages have when it comes to money, right? I'm going to say that again. What are the habits and the attitudes that shape how girls think about money and how girls engage with money from a young age? And what was fascinating for me to learn is that when we teach our boys to take risks, when we teach our boys to go for it, when we teach our boys that the sky's the limit, it's the same attitude that they bring to their finances. They're more open to taking financial risks. They're more open to being entrepreneurial. They're more open to looking for alternative ways other than a salary to actually make and bring home the bacon. We socialize girls to be provided for. We buy things for them. We bring them gifts. And even, one of the professors even made the examples to say, it's been shown that even the whole thing of getting your child a bank account, that more parents start to do that with boys than they do with girls. And so just a simple act of just getting comfortable with saving money, withdrawing money, paying for things by yourself, boy children are getting exposed to that much earlier than girl children. So the long and short of it for me to Pamela's questions is that there are structural issues, but there's also stuff that we can fix ourselves, right? And I don't feel like I have advice to women who feel that they need to be financially dependent on a man. What the advice that I have is, let's talk about how we create wealth as women. And that's the conversation I want to have. So if you guys are keen on that conversation, let me know. And I'll bring one of my friends from Investec or any of the other banks. And let's talk about how do we get women to start thinking about wealth creation very much earlier on. And how do we make the idea of women and money not such a bad thing to talk about, and not something that needs to be thought about as a tool to belittle or to be stronger than men, but just something that we need to get comfortable with ourselves. That for me is my response to Pam. I don't have advice to people who like other people's money. I don't say no when my husband spoils me every now and then, but there's no amount of spoiling that's ever going to reach the impact of what's possible when I decide to go on a wealth creation journey on my own as a woman. And that's what I want us to talk about. How should we be thinking about money? How should we be thinking about wealth? And how do we make sure that we're not always on the back foot when it comes to wealth creation as women? Okay, so lots of comments. So I just want to pick up a couple of them. Tabeleng, let me see your comments. Oh, it's gone now. So I'm going to just go back so that Tabeleng is saying, that's so true. I remember reiterating that I have a very high risk appetite and tolerance to my financial advisor, and he kept asking, are you sure? Right? And that's the thing. Like, you need to work through your advisor's own biases before they hear you about the kind of things that you want to do. And I think that's really important. So it would be interesting even to maybe hear someone who is a financial advisor who is in that space to talk about what are the good questions we should be asking when we're sitting down with our financial advisors to make sure that you're getting the best possible financial advice as a woman as possible, or even as a guy, right? So we don't discriminate here. Basket Buddy is saying, why do men don't get the same penalty because women do not get themselves pregnant? I mean, it's such a good question. I mean, one of the things we keep celebrating as the world, which confuses me, is we keep celebrating paternity leave, right? As if it's this big breakthrough, innovative thing. And actually, paternity leave, or the absence of paternity leave, is part of the issue we have with society. Firstly, we just should have parental leave as a starting point. And the fact that when companies give a man 2 weeks of paternity leave, it's seen as a breakthrough, innovative policy is befuddling to me. Because what can you do for a newborn child for 2 weeks? And it's the exact same reason why a woman would take up as much as a year off, because that's how much time a child needs. Now, I'm not saying that we all should take a year off when we have children, but imagine if parental leave allowed both spouses or both partners, if you're not married, to be as present as possible. It would actually deal with a lot of the attitudes and behaviors that creep in afterwards about who's the primary caregiver, who plays the role of the nurturer, and it would normalize, I think, amongst men as well, that parenting is as much a man's job as it is a woman's job. Sure enough, you're not the one who's pregnant. Sure enough, you're not the one who's breastfeeding. But I think everything else you can pretty much do. So I think that's a great question. Nombulelo saying, please, we need that conversation. So that's women and wealth. We're going to look at that. Naledi, thank you as well. Let's talk about money, guys. I don't like talking about other people wanting other people's money. I want to talk about how we're making our own money. Let me share a quick story. Tim Martha saying, and I'm going to share my story after this, saying, we're keen and ready to talk about women and money. It's so sad that in our townships and villages, women are in the forefront of Stockfelds. It is just the unbanked community. Toli is saying, yes, conversation on wealth creation for women, and kudos to the approach to the initial question. Thank you, Toli. Yours is all about saying, let's definitely have that conversation. Peter says, it starts with the conversation that women should be having with their friends and social circles. Otherwise, the same socialization and stereotypical view of women will persist. You know, Peter, I don't know if it starts with our friends, having the conversation with our friends. I think it starts at home. I think and I'm not talking home as in the conversation I'm having with my husband, like the conversation I'm having with my parents. Because, I remember seeing this, I'm so bad with these following Twitter and all of that, but seeing with a celebrity, 2 celebrities were having a conversation, 2 women celebrities, and one of them was saying, this guy was giving her 50,000 Rand a month allowance. And it became a big talking point on Twitter about, how much allowance she was getting. Guys, if these are the conversations people are having in their friendship circles, count me out. I'm not interested in that conversation. I'm interested in a conversation about intergenerational wealth. That's what I want to talk about. I don't only want to talk about how we're building wealth today. I want to also talk about how do we make a generational wealth? How do I make so much now so that it has an impact on the generation after me and the generation after that? That's what. Let me just be unfair, not unfair. Let me just be like deathly honest. I used to host these conversations with one of the leading banks on intergenerational wealth. This was before COVID, and we're hosting these conversations around the country. And we went to Stellenbosch, and the audience was 99.9% white. I was the only black person in the room, and it was probably 200 people there. Then we went from Stellenbosch, we went to Cape Town, and maybe there the audience was about 90% white. Speckles here and there of people of color. Then we went to Pretoria, same thing. The audience was 99% white. And it made me wonder, are we not, as a black society and a black community, having the conversation about intergenerational wealth? Could it be that we're still having the conversation on just wealth building? Like we're still thinking about how do we build sustainable wealth? And of course, we do have examples of intergenerational wealth, right? We see taxi businesses being passed on from one family to the other. We see now, maybe increasingly now, some families being able to pass on properties from one family to another. But the honest truth is that it's not the norm. You don't hear of, the Kumalos who own ShopRite from 1950. Or just Browns. Let's not make it fictitious. Browns, the guys that make the rings. If you go into the history of Browns, you see how it was one family and it was generation after generation after generation after generation looking after that business and building that wealth. And if we're not even in the room, then trust and believe that we're not in the conversation. And I'm just wondering whether we are thinking intentionally about intergenerational wealth and what are the trade-offs about the things we have to give up now in order to realize intergenerational wealth for the next generation and the next generation. And I don't want this to be confused with black tax and all of that. That's not what I'm talking about. I feel like when we're still in black tax zone, we haven't even begun to scratch the surface because we're not building wealth at that point. We're still talking about the erosion of the salary that we're getting monthly. I'm now specifically addressing those who have the capacity of access, who have the privilege of access, and asking the question, what are you doing with that access? Are you plundering it away so that it dies in this generation? Or are you thinking intentionally about the next generation and the next generation and how you become the seed of intergenerational wealth for your family? And that's the conversation I want us to be thinking about and talking about. Mrs. Paul Tale says, I agree, Nozi, it starts at home. I'm a mother of 2 daughters and my responsibility is to educate them about intergenerational wealth. By the way, let me make this quick. It was data, and I hope I get the numbers right. But research that we were doing in preparation for that conversation showed that 90% of the time, by the second generation, all that wealth is gone. Because when you receive money that you haven't worked for, the likelihood that you're going to fail to build on it is higher than when you're the one who's actually building the wealth. Now, I'm not saying that to deter anyone, but I'm just saying those are some of the traps that we've got to be thinking about. And guys, there are instruments around these. There's the family constitution, which I didn't know existed, but it's this whole thing about how do you build a family constitution that's like a guideline for the kind of areas that your family invests in, and how does that get carried through generation after generation after generation. So all of these things are available for us to think about in terms of wealth creation. How do we use offshore investments as an example to create intergenerational wealth? But I promise I'm going to make that conversation happen. Moiponi says, sorry to say, but blacks aren't ready for that topic. Moiponi, tell me more. I'd love to see your comment. Why do you think we're not ready? I think we're all saying this, we're all ready for this conversation. So if you're saying blacks aren't ready, let's have that conversation about what it is that we're not ready for. Mulanga is saying, I was just having this conversation with a friend. Some things are for the future. Absolutely. Kay is saying there's a book, Passing the Torch, which speaks about how you retain the wealth. It's an intentional strategy to align as a family to build wealth. I think that's lovely. I'm going to actually look it up. So I'm writing down the book, Passing the Torch. So you've got to build wealth, you've got to sustain wealth, and then you've got to transfer wealth across generations. How do we make sure that we're not bleeding money when we're doing that? And that's one of the conversations I think we need to start having. So Pamela, thank you. Great invitation to have a little bit of a meaningful conversation. You guys are asking me a lot of questions here around how do I stay motivated, and how does one become a conversation strategist? I really feel we've spoken about conversation strategy, guys, until I don't know for how long, but I'll always stick in a question if I can around that. But I want to put together 2 questions. There's a question from Surprise Mbo, and Tema Sweet. Surprise is saying, how do we become adopters as mentees, Mara? And says, for real, especially for people outside of Gauteng. Guys, but are we not doing it now? I thought I thought this was the solution. I thought this was the solution, right? So we're doing Mentorship Mondays because, it's just not possible to have, to mentor everybody who's asked. So we do these. So surprise, what I'm hoping is that you're going to send the kind of questions you'd like thoughts on. And if I don't have the answer, and I don't always have the answers, trust and believe that I'm going to find you somebody and invite that person to come and talk to us and to join us as a special edition. Timatlo, I don't know, you're going to have to help me. I don't know what more looks like, guys. And then the other question I wanted to bunch it together with is from Tema. Tema is saying, kindly recommend the best platforms to get mentors. So maybe I'll just do two. Last week we spoke to Dr. Lulu Kwakwa and she was talking to us about traversing liminality. Now, guys, traversing means to be passing through. You are traversing, traversing, traversing. Liminality speaks to that liminal space, so that emergent space. So the point of traversing liminality it's an invitation to women who are in their early careers, who are looking for mentorship opportunities. Please look them up on their website, Traversing Liminality. I think you can also go to our YouTube page, look at last week's Mentorship Monday to find out all the details about how you can be part of that mentorship circle. Then there's another mentorship circle, which I actually think is absolutely great. It's a gender woman. It's led by an amazing woman called Nomdeni. You can look her up on Instagram as well. In fact, she's invited me to a mentors hour. She's hosting an Agenda Women Summit soon. So please look up for that. And I'm going to be one of the mentors who's going to be spending time with the people who are going to be attending that summit. So there are all of these different spaces. And because I'm alive to the fact that not everybody can make it to Joburg and all of these spaces, that's why we do Mentorship Mondays. And I really want the space, guys, to be like a space where we can really ask difficult questions. And so I hope you're going to send your questions. I want to talk, at the end of each one, we always have a hard topic that we need to talk about. So I want to talk about psychological safety. But before I do, let me pick up one more question. Somebody else was saying, do you offer coaching sessions? And if so, how much? I don't offer coaching sessions to individuals. I offer coaching sessions to organizations because of the economies of scale on cost. So that's my answer. So before we get to psychological safety, Inga, thank you so much for tagging Traversing Liminality. Peter saying we need a whole topic on managing conflict in the workplace. I think we do. We need to manage conflict, but also to have a courageous conversation when we are the conflict, like we're the toxic ones. Oftentimes when we're having these conversations and everybody loves pointing out toxic people and toxic cultures and toxic workplaces. And I always say, and I'm always saying this, guys, if you're going to point to toxic people and toxic cultures, let the introspection start with you. How might you be contributing to that culture, and how much you're contributing in your own toxic ways? We all have some levels of toxic behaviors. Are you conscious and aware of them? And how do you make sure that you're not bringing them into the workplace as well? But I love that question, Peter. And I actually have what was it called again? I forget the name of the tool, but it's basically, if you think of a quadrant, right? So 4 squares. When you are approaching a difficult conversation that's marred in conflict at work, what you want to start off with is, before you tell somebody about how you're feeling, you want to tell them what you observed. So I observed that when you came in, you greeted everybody and didn't greet me. So this is what I observed. Then this is how it made me feel. It made me feel excluded, and it made me feel that you were, I observed that it was intentional, and so it made me feel like you were intentionally excluding me. Then you say to the person, what would you like them to do differently next time? What I'd like for you to do is to be conscious about your engagement with others, and the extent to which you make others feel included or excluded. Then last block, which is the hardest block, what could you do as well? And that's where you say, I might also be more conscious if it wasn't intentional, so to not be too sensitive to that situation. I'll find the tool, I'll share it with you guys, but it's a lovely tool to just think about, how am I going to start this conversation that's just so difficult for me right now. Moiponi is responding to his earlier point where you're saying black people are not ready to have a conversation around intergenerational wealth, and saying, I think we like the idea of intergenerational wealth. However, when it comes to implementation, we become no-shows. It's such a good point, and we need to talk about it, guys, because remember, in order to build intergenerational wealth, it starts with somebody giving their excess first. You're not going to build wealth without everybody giving. Somebody's going to say, I'm the one in the family who has excess, and therefore this million, instead of blowing it on myself and going to Dubai and shaking my bum on a yacht, what I'm going to do is I'm going to seed it in the family fund, or I'm going to set up a fund for the family. So let's talk about it. Let's talk a little bit about what makes it difficult for us to get into that conversation. What are the trade-offs that we need to make? And what are the things that we should be thinking about that are going to help us get there? I want to talk about psychological safety, guys. Okay. I've got 14 minutes. Okay, so I've spoken about this before. So there's a guy called Tim Clark who wrote a book called The 4 Stages of Psychological Safety. And Tim says that there are 4 stages. He says the first one is includer safety, then it's learner safety, then it's contributor safety, then it's challenger safety. Now, let me just unpack each of these. Includer safety says, even when somebody is legitimately included in a group, if we exclude them in the non-functional or the social issues, they'll still feel excluded. So it's not enough that somebody has the legitimacy in the group, but in the social ways in which we interact as a group, if we're not including that person, they're going to feel excluded anyway. Something simple. Somebody's in the workplace with you, and you guys work together, but after work, 3 of you go and have drinks at News Cafe or wherever people go, and this person's not invited. You don't think that you're doing anything wrong because this person's always getting picked up, at a particular time, so you think you're saving them the trouble. You come back the next day, and you guys have all got the stories about this thing that you all did last night, and this person wasn't invited. It's little things like that of not being conscious, the extent to which we exclude people even when they have legitimate exclusion, that makes people feel unsafe. So remember, we're talking about psychological safety. People feel unsafe in environments where they feel that despite their legitimate inclusion, they actually don't belong. And the only way people feel like that is because of the way we show up in the workplace, the way we show up in friendship circles, the way we show up in any social circle. And we make assumptions about the extent to which somebody wants to be intentionally included or not. And we assume that people are okay with being on the periphery, on the outside of certain things. We don't include them. And so they begin to feel unsafe around us. That unsafety looks like them thinking twice or thrice before they say something, because they don't know whether they're part of the inner circle or not. So when we are creating inner circles in our communities, we are automatically excluding people when we do that. So that's the first level. It's called includer safety. So be mindful of the extent to which, and I'll give you an example. Somebody was saying to me, give me a practical example. I remember, guys, now you'll know my age, but I remember in 1994, I started a new school. I went to a white school in 1994, and I transitioned from I was attending a colored school, and I was 10 years old, and I was the only black kid there with braids, actually. I was legitimately there. I had every reason and right to be there. My parents were paying the school fees. I was wearing the uniform and everything was fine. And I remember so clearly when we went to swimming that I didn't know that I needed a swimming cap. And so instead of the teacher telling me that you need a swimming cap, she would just look at the fact that I don't have a swimming cap and just exclude me out of the swimming lesson. And so in her heart, I don't know, she might have been thinking that she was saving me the trouble of, oh, poor black girl, probably too poor to have a swimming cap. Let me not put an extra financial burden on her family and on her family. So she'd come and ask me to sit with her during swimming. Completely broke me, because I was like, I want to do this, but I didn't have an understanding that this person's intention wasn't bad, but the way that was being excluded. And as a result, whenever it became any conversation about swimming and sports and things like that, I always felt unsafe because I never knew whether I had a right to be there. If I didn't have a right to be in the pool initially, where was I going to get the right to feel safe when we started talking about hockey? So these things spill over into other spaces, right? So that's includer safety. Then there's something called learner safety. Now remember, we learn by making mistakes. You don't learn something because you're just getting better at it. You get better at things because you're making mistakes. Remember that book we spoke about, Ryan Holiday? The name of the book is The Struggle is the Way. And basically Ryan Holiday says the people who are fast learners are fast learners because they make the most mistakes. They make mistakes, they learn, and they do better. If you are not making mistakes, you're learning at a slower rate, right? So that's also important for perfectionists, that the more you seek perfection, the slower your rate of learning is going to be. Now, why am I raising this question? Why am I raising this point? If we don't feel that we have learner safety, the fact that I can make a mistake here, and even if I make a mistake, it's going to be okay. I'm not going to be chased out of the community. I'm not going to be kicked out of the friendship circle. I'm not going to be disowned by my family, whatever the case may be. If I make a mistake, I have the latitude and the space to learn from it. Now, I know in corporate, we talk a lot about, oh, we must make environments safe to fail, and we must fail fast and fail forward. It's such beautiful words, but it's so difficult to practice. And I'm saying this as a person who runs a business, who has people who work for me, who make mistakes all the time, as I do make mistakes all the time. It takes a lot of discipline when somebody makes a mistake to be able to say, okay, mistake is made. Now let's talk about what is the lesson in this mistake. What have you learned that you're going to do differently as you take on the task again, right? Because a lot of mistakes are costly. So nobody wants to encourage mistakes. But here's the thing. If you don't encourage mistakes, you don't encourage learning. So we've got to make it safe for people to make mistakes. You've got to make it okay for people to try their best and know that they're not always going to meet your expectations or the standard that you're expecting from them, but that you're going to give them good feedback that's going to allow them to actually to get closer to it the next time. And that's how you give people what we call learner safety. That I'm gonna give it my best, but if I don't hit it, it's not the end of the world. Okay? Then the third one is what we call contributor safety. This is a really difficult one in the sense that contributor safety is about saying, I feel that my life, my worldview, my experiences are valid enough for me to make a contribution here. I'm going to say that again. Contributor safety is about being able to confidently say, my life, my world views, my experiences, I just want to pin that quickly, my experiences, as different as they may be from everybody else, that they are valid and legitimate here. And therefore I can make a contribution, even if it's different from every single thing I've heard up until now. Now, what tends to happen is that because we don't want to be, to run the risk of being wrong in front of other people, of being embarrassed, or being seen to make a stupid comment or say something stupid amongst our colleagues, when when there's groupthink in the room and everybody has landed on a particular perspective on an issue, that even though your worldview, your experience, the way you see it is totally different, we don't say it because we don't have contributor safety. We don't feel that our worldviews, our experience, the way we see the world is legitimate enough for us to actually use our voice and say, sorry, but from my perspective, it doesn't work like that. Now, let me give you an example of this. There's a young, I used to teach back in the day on graduate programs in South Africa, and especially a lot of my clients were the big banks. And I remember this one bank, I was teaching their graduate program, and it was a predominantly white graduate program. These guys were all like engineers and computer scientists, so it was like really the creme de la creme. And there was this one black kid in the room, and they were given an assignment, and the assignment was they needed to come up with a banking product that would work in the township economy. And they were broken up into different groups. This young boy joins a group where they decide that they're going to come up with an app for his stokvel, right? So a stokvel app. I watched this kid, quiet as anything, as everybody around him who has no experience of a stokvel has probably read about it in some theory book about financial inclusion, but has no sense of that feeling when the groceries arrive in December and the 12.5 rice is there, the 12.5 millimil is there, and the crates of cool drink and the oil and the meat and all of these amazing feelings that come with the stokvel. The people who had no idea of the monthly contributions, where your mother, your father would say, no, you can't have this because this is my contribution to the stokvel. And I pulled them aside and I said, but why are you quiet? And he's like, but who's going to believe that I'm right? And so I then proceeded to have a conversation about him, about the legitimacy of his experience, as different as it was from everybody else. The reason I'm sharing the story is that so many times I watch people at work. I sit on a lot of boards. I'm an executive director in in another company outside of my own, and I see people who have first-hand front row seats of particular experiences, not sharing their experiences because the groupthink has already arrived in the room. Everybody else has decided that there's a right answer or a right perspective, and then they don't feel that they have the legitimacy to contribute their voice. When people don't feel that they can contribute their voice, then they don't have contributor safety. The last thing I want to say is challenger safety, and this is really, really important. And this is almost like the apex of safety. When you are able to challenge your leadership without fear of being kicked out, without fear of being removed, without fear of having repercussions to yourself, to your position, to your role, to your responsibilities. Now, if we don't have challenger safety in our teams, in our workplaces, and all of these things, what's going to happen is that people are only going to tell you what you want to hear. People are not going to challenge your policies and your processes that don't work for them. And what you as a leader are going to hear is silence. Because it's either people agree with you or they don't say anything at all. And that's a really hard thing as a leader to wrap one's head around, to say, am I the kind of leader that people can give negative feedback to? Am I the kind of leader that people can give negative feedback to? And if you have any hesitation on that, the likelihood is the people working around you, for you, with you, probably don't have challenger safety. Okay, I'm going to pick up some comments and then we're going to wrap it up. I want to go all the way. I haven't missed. Peter says, how can this be practically done in corporate when KPIs are used as a yardstick to deter people from making mistakes? And that's exactly it, Peter, right? So I'm not saying I'm not saying that I have a silver lining or silver bullet to say this is the answer. But, you know, when people are looking at those KPIs and the attainment of those KPIs are going to be the difference between you and your bonus, you and in keeping your job, you've got to have the courage to have the conversation with your supervisor, your manager, and to say, what does making a mistake look like here, right? And when you do make a mistake, it's not about dwelling in that mistake and now saying, okay, well, that KPI is, I almost swore, that KPI is gone. But it's about, how do I learn from this mistake, innovate from my failure, so that I can actually do a better job at it next time. And that's the invitation. That's why I think you might want to read Ryan Holiday's book, because it really talks about how mistakes actually are the greatest and fastest way to success, because that's how you expedite your learning process, and that's how you actually do better than people who are always striving for perfection. So you're going to make mistakes against your KPIs, and I suppose part of it starts with accepting that yourself, even before you start expecting your manager to accept it. Have you accepted that part of your progress is the mistakes that you're going to be making along the way? I want to pick up something else. Pearl says, good question, Peter. In a recent interview with the MNC, so multinational corporation, I was asked if I have fired anyone. And my response was, I believe in developing people, so I don't believe in using KPIs as punitive. So that's an interesting comment. I have a whole long story about the first time I had to fire someone. And there's different reasons for firing people. But just a quick story, Pearl, is that there's a book called, the Netflix book, Gonja, what is it called? No Rules. That's what the book is called, No Rules. And basically, the founder of, one of the founders, the co-founders of Netflix, Reed Hastings, talks about the 3 Ds: develop, divert, or drop, right? And he says you can't develop people in perpetuity. There's certain people who are just not cut out for certain jobs. That's why sometimes you've got to divert people, so move them from one job to the other, because maybe they're not correctly placed in the first place, or drop them. There's certain people who do more damage than good by being in a particular team, and you as a leader need to have the courage to drop them. Develop, divert, and drop. You can't develop everyone in perpetuity. At some point, you've got to fire someone. And sometimes you've got to make the decision to give somebody a different role, a different scope of work, because where they currently are is not playing to their strengths. Okay? Okay, so Tobe is saying, is contributor safety the same as imposter syndrome? It has elements of it, right? So contributor safety is when you feel like you can't contribute because your viewpoint is not legitimate, or your worldview is not legitimate. It's not exactly the same as imposter syndrome, because imposter syndrome is constantly carrying this fear of being caught out for not being as good as you appear to be. So it's this thing of like, you know, people will come to me and say, oh, Nozi, you're such a great conversation strategist. And then what I'm hearing is like, oh my gosh, this person's going to catch me out and realize that I'm faking it. I'm not as good as I think I really am. It's not about discounting my legitimate experiences, because others have different experiences. So there's some similarities, but it's certainly not the same thing. I'm almost done. I just want to pick up, Sharon is saying, hey, Tobe, it seems the challenger safety is more on the receiver than the giver. Okay, Sharon, I didn't understand the comment, but maybe Tobe did. So when we're talking about challenger safety, it's really about how do you make your people feel safe enough to challenge you, okay? Dineo was saying challenger safety is a huge issue in corporate. We are encouraged to ask questions, but when you do, it's literally taken as challenging authority. I got so scrutinized that I changed roles, sad. And I am sad, because that is true. And I think half the reason why is that it doesn't make sense for us to talk about these things like how do we build different levels of safety when we don't do it for the leadership. That you can't give somebody feedback or challenge somebody who doesn't know how to receive negative feedback, who always personalizes everything. Like you could be challenging a process or a system, and they take that and they make it about themselves. And so that's often a reflection of a culture that just is unsafe in itself. And I really hope, Dineo, that you found more happiness in the role that you were moved to. Rato, I don't even know which one you're referring to, but Rato's like, oh, I send Zimale. But yeah, these things are tough. Chube or Chube or Tube, sorry if I'm saying it wrong, saying sometimes it's the language issue, Nosy, that discourages people to contribute in conversations. Absolutely. We can become very self-conscious about our poor command or relatively poor command of a particular language, whether it's English or other languages. And in that instance, I always say, write it down first. Write it down first. And then put your hand up and say what you need to say. Help yourself by writing it down and creating a little bit of space for you to go, okay, now that I've written it down, let me now then say it. Because for some people, it's really scary just to put up their hand and just say what it is that they think. And I think that's it. My battery is beginning to go, so I think that's it. I think that was a fantastic session. Happy Women's Day for tomorrow. Remember the 4 levels of psychological safety. Don't only be the person who's on the lookout for safety, be the person who creates safety for others. Be the person who makes people feel included. Be the person that makes people feel that they can learn here. Be the person that makes people feel that their worldviews are legitimate and valued. And be the person who's able to receive negative feedback so that people feel free to challenge those things that are not working. So thank you, all of you. Thank you so much for participating. I'm so glad you guys came. I didn't think anybody was going to be here because long weekend vibes and all of that. But I'm so glad that you guys were here. Thank you so much. And I hope you have a good evening. Ciao, ciao.